My people are so smart. And you know what else they say about my people? The polls. They say, I have the most loyal people. Did you ever see that? Where I could stand in the middle of Fifth Avenue and shoot somebody and I wouldn't lose any voters, okay? Like incredible.
That was Donald Trump in Sioux Center, Iowa, 10 years ago, nearly to the day. Looks pretty different, doesn't he? If he was joking then, it does seem pretty clear today that that hypothetical isn't much of a hypothetical anymore. Save from actually shooting someone himself. Donald Trump, the candidate, then the president, then the candidate again, and now the president again has laid waste to pretty much every guardrail, every taboo, nearly every test of decency, and in some cases, his own promises. And he hasn't lost his base. He hasn't lost his support. Not when he dumped on John McCain for being a prisoner of war. Not when he mocked a disabled journalist or a Gold Star father or called a Miss Universe winner fat or said he could grab women by their privates. Not when he said there were very fine people on both sides of a protest that included white supremacists and neo-Nazis marching in an American city. Not when he separated children from their parents and in some cases made it impossible to reunite them. Not when he suggested that people shoot bleach into their veins, which some might have actually done, judging by the spike in calls to poison control after he said it. Not when he refused to accept the results of an election, then arguably led an insurrection. Not when he said his own VP should maybe be hanged, or when he promised the U.S. won't be the policeman of the world, then bombed Iran, deposed the leader of Venezuela, and mused about taking another territory by force. Not when he pardoned a drug trafficker while he was bombing and killing people on boats that he said were drug traffickers. Not when he promised the Epstein files and then tried to keep them covered up. And not at least so far when an ICE agent carrying out his immigration policy shot and killed a woman, a mother of three, and an American citizen in her own car. The fever is not breaking. When the president, looking at me back in Miami as a 2016 candidate just weeks before the election, said, "There's something happening, Katie. There's something happening," he was right. And now it's happened over and over for 10 years. So where does that leave the rest of the country? The 60 or 70% that don't consider themselves the MAGA base. And if it is just 30 to 40% of diehard voters who will go wherever Donald Trump tells them to go, why is our politics being held hostage by that movement?
Okay, I like Katie Tur a lot. I think she has really good analysis and she speaks frankly and honestly. As a pundit, I really appreciate her. Also, it was shocking to watch that video footage of Donald Trump from 10 years ago and to see how much he has declined. Although I wouldn't necessarily take comfort in that. I know people get mad clicks on videos where they talk about how Trump is on his way out. As a friend of mine who's a physician who cares for the elderly said, old folks who seem very, very frail can hang on for an awfully long time, especially if they have access to like platinum level concierge healthcare like the president of the United States. They're going to keep limping him along as they possibly can, and I don't think we should pin all our hopes. We shouldn't count those chickens before they hatch, and we should not be placing all our hopes on that. But I actually want to push back on this whole premise of like, we need to understand why MAGA won't leave. Why won't they leave? What is the thing that will get them to leave? Because I've been pushing back on myself on this very subject for the last couple of months, because I did spend an awful lot of time really agonizing over like, why are they living in an alternate reality and how can we help them move back to reality? MAGA's a cult, y'all. It's a cult. And I know that Katie listed all of these things and was like, this wasn't a bridge too far. This wasn't the thing that made them leave. This wasn't it for them. This wasn't the final straw for them. But for some people in MAGA, it was. And that's the thing about folks leaving cults, is that they leave for reasons that you or I may not understand. Something for them becomes the final straw, and it's different for each person. And just like ex-evangelicals deconstructing and getting ready to leave the church, folks who are leaving cults often still participate in the cult long after they stop believing, because that's where they have their community, that's where they have their connection, which is why I do think it's important that we create a landing place for people who are leaving. But I no longer really think that we should be spending any energy trying to understand how we can figure out the thing that will make them all leave, because there is no such thing. I think too many Americans want this one big moment, this one big action that's just going to magically bring this to an end, or magically, what's the one thing that's going to make everybody leave MAGA? The scales will fall from their eyes. What's the one thing that's going to cause the regime to lay down? Right early on, it was there's magically going to be a recount and Kamala Harris is going to become president. or there's going to be some lawsuit and the outcome of that is that Kamala Harris is magically installed as president, or the false belief that if we have some violent riot in the streets, like one big uprising in one day, we will stop all of this. Or the belief from corporate establishment Democrats and too many people who are like still a little bit checked out. They're like, we'll just fix it in the midterms. We'll just vote and this will magically all go away. I mean, isn't that what we did with electing Joe Biden? We thought, oh, phew, thank God we've elected Joe Biden and this nightmare is over. That's not how it works. Change happens very slowly. It happens with tremendous sacrifice and the mass sustained resistance of millions and millions of people. And we don't actually need MAGA to join us in that resistance. Katie's right. It's 30 to 40% of the population. And it really doesn't matter if you look at other societies, there's always going to be that like 25, 30% of the population that's like pretty wackadoo. They're pretty way out there, super conservative, fringe. They're going to be white Christian nationalists. They're going to be like a little bit fashy. They're going to be really authoritarian. They're going to be susceptible to a cult leader like Donald Trump. That's just how human beings are. There's always going to be that chunk of people in society. We're never going to have like 80, 90% of people supporting, right, like a normal government, a real democracy, right? That's something that we all have to accept. And so we look at the numbers and realize that we don't actually have to get MAGA on our side at all. Maybe we should just spend less energy agonizing over what the thing is that will make them leave, because it's different. For all of them, it's different. And it's not going to be one big watershed moment. It's this little trickle where a person peels off for this or that or this or that. In the last 3 weeks, I've had 6 different friends whose family members have all left MAGA. And every one of them, it has been a different thing. Bombing Venezuela, murdering Renee Good, murdering Alex Preddy, the attack on the Fed, the nonsense with Trump's tariffs, and the threats against our friend and neighbor Greenland. For each of them, it was something different. And that was it. That was the line. That was the like, oh no, hell no, I'm done. But none of them suddenly have become woke. They're all still really, really conservative. They just no longer want to support what Donald Trump and his supporters want. And they're not going to spend years and years deconstructing. And they may never come over as far as us. And I do think the attack on two-way rights is a big one, because for a lot of conservatives, so much of their identity is tied up in guns. And so when the regime comes for a core part of who they are, I think that elicits a very different response. That cognitive dissonance then becomes overwhelming, and they have to make a choice, I think, for many, many MAGA. But I do want to remind you that we don't actually need them. We don't need them. We have enough of us to organize and stop this madness. And we really should be trying to reach the folks who are politically aligned with us but aren't doing anything yet. Who are your friends and neighbors who are outraged, opposed to the regime, but they're not taking any action? Who are the folks who think that we can just fix this by voting in the midterms? How do we get them plugged in and get them mobilized in sustained daily resistance against the regime? Those are the folks who are reachable. Those are the folks we need to be investing our energy in, and not so much these MAGA folks over here. But at the same time, especially if you have loved ones who are sucked down the cult of MAGA and are still trapped there, people are leaving every day. The actions of the regime are alienating people and causing people to start to deconstruct every day.
I voted once for Donald Trump in 2016. I fell for the propaganda. I watched Fox News. I've learned that the right-wing media is nothing but a propaganda machine. Fool me once, shame on me. Fool me twice, shame on you. Fool me every damn day, it's a cult.
And for just like the Republican voters, right, across America who maybe feel like, I've always voted Republican, what would you want to say to those folks?
Step over to your nearest mirror, look yourself in the eye, and ask yourself if the principles, the words, the actions, the behaviors of this administration are actually in line with the teachings of Jesus Christ. Jesus would have stood with the vulnerable and marginalized. He would not have deported them. He would not have persecuted them. He literally stood with the prostitutes and the lepers and the poor, and he wasn't out there selling, saying, Peter, I'm not going to do any more miracles unless you, invest in my Jesus meme coin. He was literally serving the poor. Yeah. These people in Washington, D.C. associated with this MAGA GOP, all they're doing is exploiting the poor at the benefit of the billionaires. All of them got to go. Every single sitting Republican in the United States needs to be primaried. What we've seen is an increase of, white supremacy. That's all it is. Point blank, hatred, white supremacy. We got to get these people out of here if we're going to survive this country intact.
Say this loud and clear. If you call yourself a blue-collar worker and you still support this fascist piece of shit in the White House, you've been completely played. You're backing a pedophile, war criminal con man whose entire life has been spent screwing over people exactly like you, not standing with labor, exploiting it. This is a man who made his entire fortune union busting, a fraud who built his brand by refusing to pay contractors, dragging them through court until they went bankrupt, then bragging about it. Electricians, carpenters, small business owners, and real working people, they were destroyed so he could save a buck and stroke his own ego. And now we're supposed to believe he's the champion of the working class? Give me a fucking break. He doesn't respect workers. He never has. He sees you as disposable. Use you, stiff you, lie to you, and then move on. Supporting him while calling yourself blue collar isn't loyalty. It isn't strength. It's just Stockholm syndrome. You're defending the very system that has been robbing you blind while he laughs all the way to the bank and sends your kids to fight his wars. If you actually care about workers, unions, wages, healthcare, or basic human dignity, this man has always been and always will be your enemy.